For my 50th Platinum trophy, I decided to go for a big one. Let's take a look at my playthrough of The Witcher 3.
Let's dance.
The Witcher 3 is one of the most well-respected RPGs out there. It recently received a next-gen upgrade, so even though this game originally came out in 2015, I figured now is a good time to finally see what all the hype was about. Looking ahead to the trophy list, this is one of the most complicated lists I've ever gone for. Most of the trophies can fall into one of 4 categories. Category 1 is the most straightforward, trophies related to the main story on Death March difficulty, the hardest difficulty level. Category 2 is all about the missable trophies related to certain side quests. The game is sprawling, and there are many opportunities to make a decision that will lock you out from an endgame trophy, so this one was pretty tricky. Category 3 is a big one, Gwent trophies. There are 195 unique Gwent cards to collect, and keeping track of which ones you've already collected takes a lot of dedication. Finally, Category 4 is all of the miscellaneous trophies, most of which are related to combat. There are actually quite a few of these trophies, and some of them were harder than you might have expected. We'll tackle these categories individually, so let's start with Category 1, beating the main game on Death March difficulty. I was pretty nervous to jump straight into the game on the highest difficulty level. On Death March difficulty, enemies have more health, hit harder, and give less experience. Geralt also doesn't heal while meditating, so you have to rely on having a good stock of food and water at all times to help you heal during a fight. This leads to some absurd moments, like scarfing down a literal ham sandwich in my pocket during the final boss fight in the game. But at the end of the day, I found Death March to be pretty manageable. In fact, by far the most challenging encounter was the very first fight in the game. The very first encounter has you fighting 4 or 5 ghouls with your buddy Vesemir. You die in about 3 hits, and it can be really easy to become overwhelmed by enemies hitting you from all sides. On top of this, every time you die, you get loaded in before a cutscene and have to mash through 15 seconds of dialogue. I probably spent an hour trying to get past this encounter, but I finally managed to get through it. After that first encounter, the game gets a little bit easier, but it still remains a challenge until you get to level 10 or so. There are some very tough early Witcher contracts where you'll be in a long fight with very little room for error. I constantly relied on the Quen sign to give me a shield and let me take an extra hit. These fights were all about patience, slowly chipping away at a monster's health while waiting for your Quen sign to recharge if you do get hit. After some hard work, I managed to beat these early contracts and get a few trophies.
Thank you.
At a certain point, the game started to become a lot easier. For me, the difficulty curve started to flatten out near the end of the Bloody Baron plotline. I'd say this is about a fifth of the way through the main game. And again, I was at level 10 or so. After finishing the Bloody Baron plot, the game sends you north to Novigrad. By that point, I was given enough side quests and Witcher contracts to be pretty overleveled. I honestly never really faced another challenging fight for the rest of the game. Even the enemy scaling seems to fall off a bit. Here's some footage of me beating the very last Witcher contract to get the trophy Geralt the Professional. This last contract had a level recommendation of 35, but I'm doing it at level 27 or 28, way below the recommendation. In the early game, there is no way I ever could have done this. I just couldn't take a contract that was 7 levels above my current level. But by the end of the game, these levels don't seem to mean too much, and every enemy is pretty easy.
Farewell.
Honestly, the same can be said for the final boss. I managed to beat this guy on my first try, and never really struggled with it. The difficulty level was honestly one of my bigger disappointments with the game. The combat was not particularly deep. Every single battle in the 70 to 90 hour playthrough was essentially pulling up a Quen shield and dodging out of the way of enemy attacks. There were a handful of enemies that required using other signs or an occasional crossbow for flying enemies, but that's about it. I also never interacted with the super complex potion and oil system. So I don't know, I just felt like I expected more out of the hardest level difficulty of this really respected game. That being said, this is probably my biggest criticism of the game, and now we can cross off step 1 of completing the main game on Death March difficulty.
The Third Northern War ended, robbed of Radovid's tactical genius.
On to step 2, missable side quest trophies. Throughout the main game, there are a ton of characters and side quests that all interact with each other. The choices that you make in one side quest will affect what quests open up to you later in the game. On the one hand, this was kind of stressful. I had to make sure to select the right dialogue options on a ton of different side quests to not lock myself out of a trophy. But stress aside, I was really impressed by the depth of these side stories. Characters would have real development, and my choices would actually impact the outcome of their stories. This game is based on a book series, and you can definitely feel the influence from those books in these moments. All of these longer side quests feel like a little novella in a way that I never experienced in a video game before. I can totally see why Netflix picked this up as a TV show. These side quests could easily be 40-minute TV episodes, kind of self-contained things. The notable side quests that involve trophies were romancing the witch Kira, helping assassinate a king, and choosing a successor to the throne of the island nation. I also had to make sure that all of my buddies showed up for the big final battle. This was one of the more involved side quests. You need to get 7 people to show up at the very end of the game. And one of the things that this meant was romancing another NPC, Triss. Here I am getting the last of my friends to join and popping that trophy. On to step 3, Gwent trophies. These trophies are probably the most infamous of the list, and for good reason. Like I said, there's 195 different Gwent cards throughout the game, and you get these by buying them from shops or beating other Gwent players throughout the world. While the card game itself is not too difficult, the challenge with these trophies is simply keeping track of which cards you've already collected. I used this website gwentcards.com to keep track of which cards I had already collected and which characters I still needed to play. I had this open next to me as I was playing and would just check off each card as I got them. They've added an in-game book that tries to help with this organization, but I found it more useful to do my own note-keeping. On top of all this headache of keeping track of which cards you've obtained, some of these cards are missable as well. There are a few characters that you can only play in the middle of a side quest, and then there's this big Gwent tournament towards the end of the game where you need to win 4 games in a row. Granted, you can still save and reload between those games, so you do have some checkpoints, but it's still a section where you have to be really careful and make sure that you don't accidentally miss a card. To top this all off, Gwent just really doesn't do it for me. Once I had a halfway decent deck, I would use the same strategy in every game of Gwent, regardless of what deck my opponents were playing. In another video on my channel, I was making fun of the robot chess game from the Horizon series, and I'm sad to say that Gwent has about the same amount of depth to it. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a super cool idea to have an in-game board game that all of the characters play. And I also understand how the development of this small little side game within a game can't possibly take up as much development time as the main gameplay mechanics. But I would absolutely love to see an open world game have a really compelling, unique game built into it. And unfortunately, The Witcher and Horizon doesn't really do that for me. Hell, I'd even be happy with chess. I'd love to have a trophy in an RPG game have me become somewhat skilled at chess in order to get that trophy. Maybe I'll have to try Red Dead Redemption, where at least poker and dominoes are a real game with some maybe interesting strategy. Anyways, I eventually tracked down the final Gwent card to pop this extremely tricky trophy. Honestly, I was pretty proud of getting this one. It took a lot of work and a lot of note-taking to know which cards I need, which cards I've already gotten, and it was cool to see it all come together. Along the way, I also got trophies related to Gwent, where I had to play 3 hero cards in a single turn, as well as win a match using only neutral cards. Alright, so moving on from Gwent, the last category of trophies is miscellaneous combat-related trophies. There were a lot of these, but honestly, it didn't take me more than a couple of hours to pick them all up. I expected it to be a little bit more grindy. I really have to shout out these 2 enemies on a random island in Skellige. I used them for at least 3 of these miscellaneous trophies. The first was killing 10 enemies by knocking them off a ledge with the Ard sign. These guys were thankfully standing right by a cliff and would respawn after a meditation. So you can see what happened. I finally got the trophy, and, well, let's not worry about what the ocean looks like down there.
Giving me no choice.
The next trophy that these 2 poor enemies were used for was the 50 headshot trophy. I needed to kill 50 enemies by finishing them off with a headshot from the crossbow. I'm pretty sure I had exactly 0 headshots by the end of the game, so I needed to grind all 50 of these out at the end of the game with these 2 poor enemies. 50 is a lot, but by equipping some crossbow-related character perks, I was able to eventually get it, albeit with a large pile of bodies left behind me. Last but not least, a very difficult combat trophy was Overkill, where I need to make 10 enemies suffer from bleeding, poisoning, and burning all at the same time. To do this, I needed to buy some arrows that were guaranteed to cause bleeding, as well as to build some poison and fire bombs. This trophy was tricky because it was hard to get all 3 attacks out without killing the enemy or having them wander away. I ended up using probably 100 crossbow bolts to get these 10 triggers, but I ultimately got this trophy and was finally able to leave these 2 guys alone. Alright, I'm 1 trophy away, and it's an embarrassingly easy one. I needed to kill 5 enemies in a fight without taking damage or using the Gwent sign. I honestly can't believe this hadn't come up yet in the main game. I think I never got this trophy because I would basically pop a Gwent shield at the start of every fight throughout the game, and so that would void my chances for this trophy. I quickly found a pack of 5 dogs, and, well, these dogs destroyed me for a while. I thought it was very funny that I'm this super over-leveled character, level 35, level 36, and this pack of 5 dogs keeps getting me, and I can't kill them all without taking a hit. After getting pretty frustrated, I decided to jump on my horse and use the crossbow to finish them off, and this worked first try. And with that, the last trophy popped, and the platinum was mine. Overall, The Witcher 3 wasn't really my type of game. I appreciate the way that your choices affected characters and questlines, but I was ultimately disappointed by the variety of the combat and the level of detail needed for these Gwent trophies. Oh well, I'm still glad I played the game, and it's nice to check another classic off my list. I'm very happy to finally have given it a shot. Again, this was Platinum Trophy number 50 for me, so it was kind of a landmark trophy. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the other trophies that I've done, I recently made a tier list video where I put all 50 of my Platinum trophies into a tier list. So if that sounds interesting to you, please go and check it out, and please like and subscribe this video, and I'll see you next time.